moving on from like the budgeting sort of techniques, I thought it would be really good to. We've obviously mentioned it a little bit with T's game, which was really fun. But you mentioned healthcare and like the £800 a month and things like that you pay for that, which is just crazy. I think we pay like what is it, 10% national insurance on our income to go towards our healthcare, which is just pennies compared to what you're paying. So it would be really interesting to go a little bit more in depth about the difference between the healthcare, like the cost of it. So obviously in the UK, we've got the NHS, which provides free healthcare at the point of use, which you pay sort of through that national insurance that I mentioned. But the downside of that is that because so many people are using it and it's not very funded, there's a lot of long waiting times and quite outdated services, and a lot of people will complain about it in that respect. Obviously, I think a little bit differently now after hearing how much you guys pay for it, but it would be interesting to, from your point of view, just to go a bit more in depth about the actual costs of things over there compared to here.
Definitely. Yep. Do you want me to just kind of talk as a whole, or is there specific questions you want me to kind of break down?
It would be interesting to know like the different types of insurance plans. Obviously, you said yours is 800, but I imagine there's different variations of things that you can get and what you get with that as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, starting from like the bottom tier, which at least in California, it's called Medicaid, which is a very heavily government funded plan. So that is 100% for free for the individual. You have to make under a certain income threshold in order to qualify for that. And the experience of that is probably similar to what you have in the HSA. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of people in there, so the wait times are harder. Typically, the service and the quality isn't to the same caliber of, say, what you would get if you're paying up the wazoo on the side for your own. So that's kind of the lowest. And then the other thing that's very heavily government funded is Medicare, which starts at 65 years old, which is probably similar to the same in terms of NHS, in terms of speed of service, quality of service, things of that nature. And then there's the middle ground, which is people that make the average income, the middle class American. And then those, and I mean, there's so much to figure out, and it's so complicated, and a lot of people struggle with it, including myself, because there's all these 100-page documents and stuff. But you have the option in terms of, typically with most employers, which you have to typically be just about full time with them, 32 plus hours a week, in order to be eligible for benefits. And it's at the discretion of the employer of whether they want to provide it or not. If you need to go get benefits on your own outside of your employer, it can get above what I'm talking about, where because the employer pays a large percentage, believe it or not, even though we're paying so much out of pocket, the employer pays a large percentage of that healthcare bill every month for you. Where if I'm going to go get what's called COBRA over here, which people typically get in terms of gap insurance, like between jobs kind of a thing, it'd probably just about double in terms of out of pocket. So, and then within the employer world, which is hopefully where the majority of us live, you have the options in terms of the caliber of service that you want, which is from a PPO, which I'm not exactly sure what that stands for, where you have a lot more freedom to go to whoever you want to. That's like the gold standard. And then HMO is kind of the middle. And then you have the high deductible plan, which is, and deductibles over here, I don't know if you have them, but it's basically, you're basically telling the insurance company, I'll pay the first X amount. I'll pay the first 500 to 10,000 is kind of the range. And as a result, I will pay less monthly. So it's kind of like an insurance policy, maybe similar to a car, where you can have less coverage, but pay less monthly. So
yeah, I think we call it excess here, don't we, Jack?
Yeah.
Which it's essentially the same. Oh, that's really interesting. I think it really upsets me when you see people on online or shows or whatever, and they maybe broken a leg, and someone's like, right, I'm going to call you an ambulance, and they're like, no, don't call me an ambulance. Like that will literally like bankrupt me. And it's like obviously so many people are struggling in the UK, and not to take away from that, but then you do look at that and you think, do you know what, we are lucky in some regard, definitely.
Yep. Yeah, the ambulance is it's an interesting one, to say the least. So, yeah, I had a time in college where my fiance lived across the street from a hospital, and one of her friends had a little bit too much to drink, or a lot of bit too much to drink. So they were concerned about her, so they freaked out, called 911, and she took an ambulance, literally like 100 meters, if that. And that was probably like a $4,000 bill, and she wasn't too happy
No,
about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
crazy.
you would kick off, wouldn't you?
She was quite upset. Yeah.
What's
Wow.
like the most outrageous bill you've ever heard of for a medical bill, and like what did it actually include? Because I know with the pregnancy thing, like you literally pay in to use a towel and to hold your own baby and things like that. Like it's just wild to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's people will get bankrupt over it over here. So it's terrifying to say the least, and that's one of the motivators for why I have a Canadian citizenship, because if things
Yeah.
go bad, I could always move there, and it's very similar in terms of the healthcare system that you guys have. I have a tenant, so I have a couple rental properties right now. I had a tenant the day before he moved into his property, literally the day before moved into the property. He had a heart attack, which was terrible, and he calls me from the hospital. I haven't heard from him. He's supposed to move in, and he's like, "My mom's coming to get the keys. I'm still moving in. I just had a minor setback." And now fast forward 6 months later, he can't afford to pay his medical debt. I'm not sure what it is, but it's tens of thousands of dollars. And now his wages are being garnished, so he's getting an additional tax out of his income to pay off this debt. So as a result, now he's struggling on rent. Family members are needing to come in order to help him out. And so on. So yeah, it can literally turn your entire life upside down. I mean, the craziest is hundreds of thousands of dollars. To answer your question directly, though, it's
It's
bonkers.
madness.
That is absolutely crazy. And when I don't know how debt's handled, and we can touch on it a little bit later, but if you don't pay your medical bills, what happens? Because here we've got like, if you fall behind your debt, you can have like bailiffs at your door and things can get taken off you, can get taken to court. But I did watch a video of someone trying to explain it, and they said that nothing like physically happens, but like your ability to lend anything, like get a house or a car or anything in the future is just like shot. You just can't do it. Is that true?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, to what extent you guys have like credit scores over there? Is that something you guys
Yeah.
buy? Okay. And that's how you qualify for like a mortgage or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
similar over here. So that will, by not paying debts, that's a large portion of your ability to lend, because the whole concept of lending is they're going to give you money assuming you're going to give it back. And if you've proven that you haven't done that to other people, then they might not give you money. So it definitely drastically impacts your ability to be lent on. In terms of like, yeah, I mean, someone coming and knocking at your door, it's a pretty low probability. I've never really heard of someone in my circle that's ever happened to. But yeah, it definitely hurts your day-to-day operations. And I mean, you always have the option to go bankrupt, which is horrific, and you start from zero and your credit score is hurt for the next 7 years or something. And pretty much all debt, and this is just criminal to me, but outside of student loan debt, is essentially bankruptable. Student loan debt, for whatever reason, they decided that even if you go bankrupt, you can't forego that one, which is why there's such a student loan crisis over here. So yeah, I could literally wipe out everything, start from scratch. It's terrible, but student loans are there for your entire life. So
Wow.
um,
Okay.
yeah, it's bad. And that's why student loan debt is so high, and at least in my opinion, is because, I mean, you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to get your money back at some point in that next 80 years from that person. So they're willing to lend more and more to an 18-year-old, and then thus the colleges are willing to increase or able to increase their spending or their cost more and more, because people can pay it because they have the money for it. So it's terrible.
Well, yeah. Yes, with the education thing, you mentioned it earlier as well, but the way it works in the UK is, so it kind of feels free, doesn't it? See, like it feels like it's
Yeah.
free.
I don't
But
feel like I'm in debt, even though I've got so much student loan debt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I think I've got like £60,000 student debt.
Really?
But the way it works is the government give you a student loan which pays for your tuition, and you also get like a separate maintenance loan to pay for the living costs and things like that. But then you don't actually pay that student loan back until you hit a certain income. So I think it's like 27,500. So until you hit that income, you don't pay anything back. And then when you do hit that income, you only pay a percent. I think it's 9% of the amount that's over that income. So if I earned 30,000, I'd only pay 9% of 2,500 per year. And then it writes itself off after 40 years as well, I think. Or is it 30 years? I can't remember.
30.
So whatever's left at that time, you just pay it off. It's just written off, sorry.
So there is, wow, that's fascinating, because I've always heard through everyone that there's no student loans over there and you get your first 4 years on the house kind of a thing. So
it is in Scotland. I think that's maybe why, if your fiance is from Scotland.
Okay,
is she from Scotland or is she from England?
She's from England. She's from the Cotswolds, but she went to school in Scotland.
Right, okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Because in Scotland it is free. I don't know why.
Only if you go to study in Scotland, though. So you have to be from Scotland and study in Scotland. But then I do think that the people say that the cost of things is higher, like the tax on like food and actual things you buy covers it apparently. But
they got to find it somehow. So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, though, huh?
I did wonder, like, who provides student loans in America? So I know there is, from the research I've done, there's federal loans, but then you can also get like private loans. So could you like explain that in a little bit more detail, if you don't mind, Gannon?
I'll do my best. Yeah. So there's federal loans, and those are typically subsidized. So there's subsidized, unsubsidized, and then private loans, which you want to try to stay away from as best as possible. But you can get subsidized loans, which from my understanding, and we need to fact check this, but from my understanding, during your time in college, you're not paying any interest on those student loans whatsoever. So the clock only starts for when you graduate and you can actually make money, versus unsubsidized, which is more common for graduate school, professional degrees, everything after that 4-year marker. That is typically unsubsidized, which means that the second you take on that money, which is common for most loans, you're paying interest on it right away. And although they don't expect you to pay it until your 4 years or whatever the degree is up, the clock is still ticking. So you're compounding all this interest against you during that time, which is very painful, to say the least. So that's all that works. And then, you've got private loans, which, I could go to a loan shark today and get something that I don't even want to know what the interest rate on it would be. It would be unfathomable.
Crazy.
10, 15, 20, I don't even know. And loan sharks is where you get the world of, if you don't pay, then you're getting knocked on your door, and things are not pretty, to say the least. And there's horror stories when it comes to that stuff. So you try to stay away from those. I'm guessing credit card interest is probably similar over there. It's astronomical over here. And I don't know how much you guys live on credit cards versus your standard kind of debit cards, but 20 to 30% on a credit card is just standard.
Right. Yeah, that's something I did want to ask, because I think when you hear of like Americans using finance, it's always, and as you said, you look at your credit card statement, whereas for us, I think it's kind of reverse, where we just look at our bank statement, and then people mainly, if they're using credit cards like correctly, they'd maybe put like one bill on it and then they pay it off the next month, and they'd kind of only touch it. Either people can like take advantage of it and kind of abuse it and fall into debt, but it is largely used kind of just to improve your credit score. So you pay that off to show lenders I am responsible, but then that's it, you don't touch it for anything else. So it is very interesting. I think that's such a big difference.
So interesting, because we live and breathe on credit cards, and typically you're on one side of the game or the other side of the game. And what I mean by that is, I spend everything through my credit card, and the reason that I do that is because I get 2% cash back. So everything's at a 2% discount functionally, and then you get X amount of money based on your spend every month. But so for me, it's great that we have a credit card system, because I'm very disciplined on it, and the credit card companies give all these perks and all of this stuff because they want people using them, because the vast majority of Americans struggle to manage money, and they get into debt. And then once you're in debt and credit card, it's 20 to 30% interest today, which is just insane. So it's this hole that so many people get into, and it's buy now, pay later kind of concept. And then it's just a vicious cycle that it's another bill that you just can't get out of. So it's bad.
Wow. Something else that I think is quite different is pensions and retirement. So I know we briefly touched on it before, but just to kind of give an explanation of how it works in the UK. So we do have a state pension. So if that's the basic government provided pension, and it is based on national insurance contributions. So essentially, how long have you worked and how long have you've paid national insurance to kind of earn that pension. So the full rate is just over £200 a week, but again, that can differ just depending on how long you've paid national insurance for. But then we also do have workplace pensions, which is kind of legally like all employers have to offer this to their employees, and then they also have to contribute to it. So some employers like match your contribution, some will do more, some will do less, and it's something you can opt out of, but it is tax deductible, which is also a really good thing and why a lot of people do tend to stay opted in. And then there's also personal pensions and ISAs and things like that, but just how does that differ to America?
So we have, in terms of the national one that you talked about, we have Social Security, which sounds to be extremely similar, where it's based on you get a certain amount when you retire indefinitely, and it's based on what you contribute as a working employee throughout that time. So the average, I think I was looking it up, is I think maybe 1,800 a month is the average when you hit, I believe it's, I think 60, you can start at 62 and a half all the way up to 70 or something for when you want to start taking it out. So that's a piece of it. Obviously that's not enough to cover your overhead, to say the least, especially in the States. And then we don't have employee provided pensions anymore. For the most part, there's a few companies out there that do it a little bit, but back in the 80s or so, they did away with those, and now they put that responsibility on the employee. So then we have these other things, which is typically the 401k, which is similar to what you have. It sounds like kind of where we can get, at least you put it in before you pay taxes on it. So it's tax deferred essentially. You will eventually pay income tax on it when you take it out in retirement. But employers aren't required to do that necessarily. Some employers, the good employers, probably the majority of them, have some sort of a match where, say you put in 2% of your salary, say it's 100,000, you put in 2%, so 2,000, they'll match the first 2%. So they'll also put in 2,000. And then you're not allowed to touch that money until you retire, until 60 years old, basically. You can touch it, but you got to pay a penalty on it. Is kind of how it works. So it'll be really interesting because, I mean, that was the 80s. We're kind of seeing this whole new strategy come into play for the first time over these last few years and going into the future of, does the 401k actually work? Does a non-pension system actually work? And we'll see. Based on the numbers, it doesn't look pretty, to say the least. So yeah, we'll see how. Or definitely have a retirement crisis and a big problem coming up in the next 20 years or so.
Oh wow!
Because people just don't have enough money to retire because they can't afford to live, like Jack was talking about, where the vast majority we just can't save any money. Most people can't, so it's bad. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
that it scares me.
That's why
I know,
I'm so addicted to the game of, like personal finance. Because I mean, the one more little story. Sorry, but my grandpa, he did very well for himself. He made a significant amount of money early on, 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, everything you can dream of, boats, planes, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward to his 60s, 70s, and 80s. He files bankruptcy. He has no money. He's 80 years old, and I mean, he has negative money at this point, and he's just surviving, still working at 80 years old, which is also terrifying to me, to just try to make it, So personal experience plus just looking at numbers is why I'm so addicted in the game at this point in terms of personal finance, because it's terrifying, to say the least. So
no, I don't blame you. I think I'm, like I said, only 25, and all I can think about is like saving this and doing this for the future and doing like it is addictive. And I think, I mean, obviously there's definitely a too much, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be addicted to, isn't it? So definitely. Last thing for me on this section before I pass over to Jack. So you touched on at the start about how you live in different states at different times of the year for tax reasons. I also chasing the sun, which I don't blame you for. But could you explain the income tax differences? Because in the UK, it's kind of just uniform across the country. I think Scotland and Wales, there might be some differences, but in the most part, it's the same.
Yep. So every state has a different state income tax rate. The majority of them, from my understanding, are what's called an effective tax rate. So very similar to what we have from a federal standpoint. And the setup behind that is if you make less money, you should pay a lower percentage of taxes. So, for example, California, which is the top of the food chain along with New York in terms of the expenses, you can pay anywhere from 0% to 13% of state income tax. And that's just to the state. And then you tack on top of that federal, Social Security, all of these other things. And then there's certain states out there that have a flat tax rate where I believe New Jersey, or maybe Pennsylvania, one of them is just a flat 6%. It doesn't matter how much money you make. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is the states with no state income tax: Florida, Arkansas, Washington, Texas. There's a handful of them that have no state income tax. You make up for it in other ways, such as property tax, sales tax, insurance premiums, all these other things that you end up spending a lot of money on. So, yeah, I mean, for us, considering we make a lot of money and don't spend that much money, so it's very advantageous for us to live in a state such as Florida, where maybe our property tax is higher, but we're going to live in a lower priced house than we would if we lived in, say, or that we're going to live in a lower price house than what we would based on, or what we should based on our income. So for us, I mean, when we ran the numbers, my fiance was interviewing for a job that was this one and then one that was in California. And the pay scale for the one in California was about 60% higher, which is just crazy.
Wow.
But when we actually put the numbers in the spreadsheet, because of my income, we actually would save and make more money living in Florida. So just moving on a $500,000 income, which granted is insane. That's like the top 1%, top couple percent in the US. Just moving from California to Florida, we're saving $50,000 to $60,000 a year.
Gee.
Which is $5,000 to $6,000 a month, like that's all a
Yeah.
lot of our spend. So
No, 100%. Do a lot of people, I mean, I know you, like you said, you're in a fortunate position to be able to do that, but is that kind of a strategy that a lot of people adopt, or are you kind of the minority in terms of that?
people are definitely aware of it. I guess it's more surprising to me that people don't consider it as much as I do. And maybe it's just such a big number when I throw out $50,000. It's like it
Yeah.
hurts a little bit more. But people are definitely aware of it, and there is people flocking to Texas largely because of that, along with good weather, or people leaving California. We have this whole California exodus because home prices are so high and taxes are so high. So people are definitely aware of it and moving to states. When you're looking to move to a state, I would say the majority are aware and considering the tax implications of that.
Okay. Very interesting.
So I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit throughout the episode anyway, but in terms of like class divides and pay gaps, in the UK there's quite an inequality in terms of income. Like there's quite a difference between people with low income and people with a higher income. So just as an example, spending and saving behaviour, people with a low income, like households that aren't earning as much, aren't really able to save anything. Just because they're spending all their money on essentials like housing, food, utilities, and there's just not really any room left for saving money. Whereas the higher income households, they have that disposable income to save or invest, or just to give them that opportunity to get to that higher wealth in the long run. Whereas those low income people are just kind of stuck in this paycheck to paycheck cycle. And obviously you've mentioned it briefly of how it's similar for people in the US, but just thought if we could go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, starting from the least fortunate people, which are the homeless people, and a fair amount of those people were I mean, functioning members of society, making money, paying taxes, all of that, which we have a huge homelessness crisis, largely in part due to that issue. And additionally, the whole healthcare costs and all of that. And I mean, a lot of those people have different struggles from a health standpoint, mental standpoint. So, but yeah, I mean, in California on $100,000 wage, like you're surviving at that point, which is crazy, especially in some of the bigger cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. I mean, it's very difficult to save money even on that wage in that location. So if you can make that 100,000 and say somewhere like in Arkansas or something, where I mean that's where one of my rental houses is, and it's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath for $1,300 a month in rent. So, I mean, but the percentage of people that make that kind of money in those locations is significantly lower. So, but to answer your question directly, I mean, it's a huge problem over here. It's a huge crisis. And we also don't have pensions to lean back on. So unless you work for the state or the government and there's pensions there, these people that are saving no money now, and we know a lot, especially being in the personal finance world, about compound interest and that dollar today is worth 10x in the future kind of a thing. These people that are struggling in their earlier careers from 20 to 40 years old that can't save a dollar, they're, I mean, it sounds intense, but they're doomed. I mean, it's the reality of it, you know? I mean, by the time they get to retirement, they're going to have no money, and it's a huge crisis. And that's largely in part why I talk about it and why I'm so scared about it. And just, I mean, we all need to learn, because we don't learn how to pay taxes or anything in school. So we got to take it upon ourselves, to say the least. But it's a huge crisis, and I'm terrified about it, to answer it.
I don't blame you. I'd be exactly the
same. Speaking of, like what you said, mentioned homeless people and things like that, a big problem we have over here is, for the same reasons, being able to access rentals or get a mortgage in the first place. Is it the same over there? Or like for a person my age, 26, feels almost impossible to save up your £60,000 deposit that you need on your mortgage. So is it similar over there for you guys, or?
Absolutely. So I mean, there's two pieces to it. One, you got to save the 60,000, and then two, you got to qualify for the house based on your income, and that's how our mortgage. I'm guessing it's similar to you guys. So yeah, I mean, I was speaking to a guy yesterday, and he makes $50,000, and he lives in Denver, Colorado. Any big city, it's going to be expensive. So we were looking at houses and to see what he could even qualify for, and quite honestly, it was basically nothing. He could buy a plot of land. He could buy a mobile home, which would be less than ideal. So, the affordability to even be able to qualify based on an average income is it's just not there. So then people are forced to rent indefinitely, and then obviously rent's going to go up over time, and you're not locked in at a certain price. You're not building equity. There's all these other problems. So, a massive housing affordability crisis, which was exacerbated during the last 4 years because housing prices shot up, which I'm guessing they did over there as well. Where us in our 20s and now 30s, I guess, we felt like we were getting close, or at least some of us did. And then the needle moved, and the goalpost moved, and now we're like, well, this is impossible, you know? So, it's a huge problem. I mean, I make this money that I make, or we make, me and my fiance, and like, we still don't own a personal residence, partially because we move so much, where we've moved probably 5 times in the last 5 years. But even just, I look at the overhead, and I can spend less money renting that same house that I would buy, which is why a lot of us look at the numbers and we just decide to continue to rent.
Yeah. Is it as important over there as it is here? Because we spoke on the last episode, me and Jack, about homeowning, and like, I think a lot of people our age, a lot of people went to school with, they're like getting their houses, and it's like this big thing that everyone just kind of strives towards, and sometimes a little bit out of reach. And like you said, people are still saving and trying to build that credit up, but it's such a big deal over here to own a house. Is it the same?
Absolutely. So, I mean, just to shed a little light on it, like I in recruiting, it's basically a sales role that we do. So I interview a lot of people for our team, and when I ask them the question of what's your why, like, why are you showing up to work every day? The vast majority of answers is, well, I want to buy a house someday. So that's on everyone's mind. But anyone that has a house is like, it's like a huge accomplishment, where if we go back to like our parents' generation, that was just the standard. You know, where now if you have that's like a thing of like, oh, and they own their house, it's like, ooh, you know, like, wow, good for them. Versus now, it's like, versus back then, like, if you were the mailman, or you worked at the grocery store or whatever, you bought a house, and that was just standard, you know. So
yeah, definitely the same over here. Speaking still on affordability, so for a bit of context, IE Hub, the way we work, we help people in debt, but we kind of provide an income and expenditure like form online, so people will fill it in, and then they'll be able to share it with literally anyone they're in debt to. And a lot of people have like a lot of anxiety calling up creditors, being like, I'm in debt, I can't afford to pay this, what can we do? So then we kind of take that away from them and just allow them to send it online. But we are able to run because affordability assessments are so big and so important to a lot of people. So companies and like financial institutions, lenders can't lend any money to anyone without being able to like correctly assess their affordability and say this person can afford this, and then they can also afford it with interest rates rise and drop and things like that. So how important are affordability assessments in America compared to us?
I would say it depends on where you're looking to get the money lent from. So a good
Okay.
example of it is for buying a house, and that's super important there. And they get really into the weeds in terms of what's your income, what's your debt, what's your credit score, how much credit do you have access to. There's so many different aspects that they look at.
Hmm.
But on other things such as like a credit card, I mean, I could go qualify, or I mean, anyone, even someone with $20,000 in income could go qualify for a credit card today. They might give that person less money, say 500 to 5,000, where if I went and applied for a credit card, they would give me 50,000. You know,
Right.
because they'll run your credit score, and by running your credit score, which I don't know if it's similar over there, they're looking at all these things, and they're looking to be like, okay, how much money do you make? What's your
Yeah.
expenses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Hmm.
definitely very important and something that's considered in all lending over here. And credit score is a big thing that's kind of like the pinnacle of all that, that is a large priority for most people. And it's not largely talked about from a social setting necessarily, but from a financial setting, it's definitely top of mind.
Yeah. Okay, that's quite interesting. And knowing like a little bit, obviously, I'll just give you literally the ballpark of what IE Hub does. Do you think something like IE Hub would be useful in America? Like, do you think people who are in debt would benefit from being able to use something like us? Or, I mean, you can say no, don't we won't take any offense. It's just intriguing to know.
Absolutely. So just to make sure I understand, like the end goal from it is that you do the affordability assessment, and then based on that, you are then sending that information to the lenders that you currently have money out with or that you owe money to. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so we
Mhm.
can work in kind of two different ways. So we can do it that way where before you get any money from anyone, you can complete this form, send it to the lender, and they can say yes or no. But then we can also work kind of after the fact of someone, if they've already got credit but they fall into debt and they can't afford it, then they can also complete this form and then send it to them and say, I can't afford to pay this. This is what I've got coming in, going out. This is my disposable income. If I've got a lot of people who come to us are in the minus in their disposable income, so they're like, where am I going to get this money from? And rather than phoning up eight, nine, 10 different companies, they can all do it online. So there is both kind of sides of it.
Okay, so the second side there is the goal from that to get their debt reduced? Is it to reduce their monthly payment? What's like the end goal from the messaging to them?
So once we've sent the form off, it's kind of up to the company. So a lot of the times the ideal goal when we speak to customers is to kind of get put on a payment plan. So if they've got like £5,000 worth of debt, maybe they want to reduce that and say I can pay £50 a month. And obviously that's like a long time frame, but if that's all they can afford, that's all they can afford. Or yeah, sometimes there is kind of options, maybe there's grants to support out there, but that's kind of up to the company once they've received that, if that makes sense.
Yep. So I think, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the pains that are over there are the same pains that are over here. And
Hmm.
there's kind of two things that I look at, which is one, I mean, when you're that much in debt, and I mean, the sky is falling, you have this 10,000 pound gorilla sitting on top of you, and the ability to take that off, I mean, is dang near impossible. And I mean, you're just kind of frozen. You're like a deer in the headlights of like, I don't know what to do. And there's just, I mean, there's 10 debtors or creditors that you owe money to, and being able to just do one thing with you guys and then have that sent to all of them instead of sitting there
Mhm.
and making the phone calls, which is the other side of it. And nobody
Hmm.
wants to make the call. Like
No.
nobody wants to, it's terrifying, you know? Nobody wants to give the bad news. Nobody wants to get yelled at. They have PTSD from previous experiences. So removing that like barrier, because you just got to get it started. And once you get momentum, and they talk about all the baby steps and the snowball versus the avalanche debt payment method and all of these things, you just got to get momentum. So something like this, where it's very, I sit behind the screen, which is great initially, and type things into a computer, and that gets it started, is super
Hmm.
important. And I think it would be super helpful.
Okay. That's good. It's good to know, yeah, because we haven't touched America yet. Like we're all very, like I said, UK based, so it's interesting knowing if it actually would be viable there. One last thing for me before we conclude. So buy now, pay later is something it's still unregulated in the UK, but it's past year, 2 years, it's skyrocketing in popularity. So many people, especially the younger people, are putting so much on like Klarna and likes of that. In terms of America, what is it like? Is it kind of similar? Is it as popular there?
It's terrible. I mean, you'll see
Yeah.
the memes, you'll see the TikToks of. I mean, at some points it's just a joke where you can buy your loaf of bread and put it on a payment plan. I don't know if it's that extreme,
Yeah.
but pretty much anything under the sun is buy now, pay later option. And if it's not from the primary provider, there's other companies that you can go to have a buy now, pay later set up with them. So I
Right.
mean, just to rattle things off, obviously cars, which is the top of the expenses, like mattresses, any sort of furniture in your house, like that microphone, you could probably do a buy now, pay later on that if you want to. So concert
Mm.
tickets, any sort of experience, like literally anything under the sun. And like in the moment when you put it down, you're like, oh, okay, well, it's only another $42 a month for the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be.
Hmm.
It's you can justify it from that standpoint. You're like, okay, I've got $42 in my budget. But when you do that 10 times, now you got
Yeah.
400,
Yeah.
$500. That's when it really gets into an issue. And then you lose your job. And I mean, I try to operate with as little debt as possible, not only from a consumer debt standpoint, but from a mortgage standpoint, car payments we pay in cash, like all of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Because everything's fine and dandy when I'm making the money that I'm making. But at the end of the day, I work for a company, and tomorrow they could say it was nice knowing you.
Yeah.
And now I have all this overhead that I can't get rid of,
Hmm.
and I have no money coming in. So, yeah.
Yeah. So
That,
scary. I think so many people rely on it. Um, just before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on today again, or anything? Any questions you have for us? Just
I mean, the whole like offering that you guys have is super interesting, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. We could sit here and we could talk about the data and we can talk about the numbers and sit on a spreadsheet and look at this is the clear answer, but there's the other side of this whole game, which is the human side of it, the emotional side of it, and considering those things when making decisions and building out either a budget or a financial plan or whatever it may be, both from a debt standpoint as well as from all the other standpoints, a budgeting standpoint, for example. So I think that what you guys are doing is very interesting, and I think it could be something that's very effective because although maybe it wasn't considered at face value in terms of what the actual product is, I think there's
Mhm.
other things that it benefits from. And when you brought it up, it made me think about why Ubers became so successful compared to taxis, because nobody wanted to ring up the taxi. They just wanted to
Yeah.
press the button on the app. And reducing, I mean, it sounds bad, but reducing the social connection or the social awkwardness that we all see, just to get things rolling is super beneficial.
Hmm.
So I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we definitely appreciate that. I absolutely love it. And I think we and Jack speak to customers and we get like case studies, we get to actually talk to them and hear how we've helped them. And a lot of them say, like, I've got so much anxiety, I've got depression, like this debt that I've got is like just like this mountain on my head and it's
Mm.
affecting my mental health. And the last thing I need is to almost justify why I'm in this debt to this random stranger on the phone. So yeah, I'm glad that you see it the way that we do. So yeah, no, definitely appreciate that. Thank you. But yeah, I think that's it. We will wrap up the episode there. It's been a long one, so we'll probably will cut it into two, and we'll figure that one out. But thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We'll leave all of Gannon's social media and all of his links below if you want to go and check out his content, because I'm sure you will. It is absolutely amazing. But thank you very much, Gannon, for joining and spending time with us. I know it's ran over it quite a lot, but we've absolutely loved it, every single
Yeah, it's
minute.
really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It's very interesting for me as well to hear the other side of the pond. So
Yeah,
we're all in this
definitely.
together.
We are. So thank you very much, and we will speak to you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.